Good afternoon. I was checking to see if it was morning in Alaska, but good afternoon. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining our first ever DOE Office of Indian Energy virtual program review. We haven't done this way before, but so far it's working. For those who don't know me, my name is Lizana Pierce. I'm a mechanical engineer by degree. I am the deployment supervisor for the Office of Indian Energy, so I oversee the deployment or the execution program, which includes financial assistance, technical assistance, and education and capacity building. For those of you who weren't able to join us for the first session, we did have a moving invocation. We had an introduction by Director Kevin R. Frost. I gave a PowerPoint overview of the program as well. That will be posted if you're interested. Before we jump into the project presentations today, let's go over some event details. Today's webinar and the review in general will be recorded and will be made available on DOE's Office of Indian Energy website in a couple of weeks. Copies of the presentation slides will be posted on the website soon. Everyone will receive a post-event email with a link to the page where the slides of the recording will be located. Because we are recording this webinar, all phones have been muted, most of them. I'm not sure all of them because I hear stuff, but anyway. We will answer written questions at the end of the final presentation. If you haven't noticed on the agenda, we've left sort of the Alaska presentations to the third session of each day, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So if you're specifically interested in listening and hearing about the Alaska projects, they're all grouped in this last session, primarily because of the time change or time differences. So again, we'll be taking questions at the end of the final presentation. Please submit those at any time. Click on the question box in the webinar control box on your screen and type in your question. For presenters, please ensure that you're muted when you're not presenting. And be aware that because we're on a tight timeline, we will provide you a 5-minute verbal reminder 15 minutes into your presentation. So please plan your time accordingly. We also need, we'll need to move on to the next presenter at 20 minutes. We'll be responding to questions at the end. And there you go. Could you bring up the second slide, please, Monica? No, the second slide of the PowerPoint that you just had up. Sorry. Of the other slide deck. Here we go. Okay, I just wanted to give a little bit of introduction for the program review, the purpose of it. It is a reporting requirement of these grants, and it provides an annual project progress update for us. They will all be posted, just like all the presentations in the past number of years, going back to, I think, 2002. So if I count right, this is like the 18th annual program review, first time going virtual. The intent of this really is to allow tribes and tribal entities to share their successes, or so, you know, to celebrate each other's successes, to share your lessons learned as well. Typically, it's also a wonderful opportunity to network, not so much on a virtual program, but we will have questions, and you know, if there's somebody you want to touch base with later, you know, you typically will have their contact information on their slides. So would you go to the, I think it's the 6th page of this presentation, 6th slide. So as I said, this is the third session of day 1, and we're going to have presentations by David Messier and Baby Leah on the Huslia Tribal Council, Huslia Biomass Project. David will also be presenting on the Hughes Tribal Council Project, Sustainable Solar Energy at the Hughes Village in Alaska. And thirdly, we'll have Forrest Bunton from Alaska Village Electric Corp and presenting on, I assume, many of the projects that we funded. The one specifically here is Stebbins and St. Michael's wind energy construction project, but there have been a number of others. There's AVIC has quite a few wind turbines and providing energy to many villages across Alaska. So with that, if you would pull up Huslia's slides, and I will turn the floor over to David. And if Leah gets on, we'll add her as well. David, you're on.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lizana. And so my name is Dave Messier. I work with Tanana Chiefs Conference. I'm not Leah David, the Tribal Finance Officer for Huslia. Leah, I spoke with her this morning, and she's in quarantine up in Huslia. Had to come into town for some medical issues, and so they're under COVID quarantine for 14 days when they return. And so she was nervous that her internet connection might not be good enough to support a call. And so I said that I would try my best to represent Huslia. So hopefully I do okay. If you guys can progress to the next slide. So Huslia Village Council is located about 200 air miles or so northwest of Fairbanks. They're only accessible, the community is only accessible by airplane during most of the year, and then by barge in the summer. I should say airplane all of the year, and barge or riverboat during the summer months. The residents are Koyukon Athabascan, and the majority of the energy in the community all comes in through imported diesel fuel. Next slide. And obviously that presents a little bit of an issue when it comes to tribal energy security and sovereignty. And so one of the main goals for the Huslia Village Council is to preserve the traditional way of life in the community. And folks who've been living in Huslia for thousands of years or in that area have heated with wood for all of that time. Only recently, in the last 50 or 100 years, has the energy source switched from cordwood and locally available energy to imported diesel. And so when you're importing all of your diesel, you as a community are subject to fluctuations in world oil prices. And that doesn't leave the community with much control on how much it costs to budget for some of the major facilities in their community when it comes to predicting how much heating fuel is going to be a part of their budget. And so the community expressed a need to move from imported diesel fuel for heating towards locally sourced biomass. Next slide. And so this project, the objective of the project was to construct a community scale biomass project that would heat 3 major buildings: the community clinic, the community water plant, and the community school. And they're located conveniently in roughly the same area of Huslia. I would say there's the longest run that we've got is probably 200 to 300 feet from the heating system that was put in. And one of the big goals of the project is not just to take ownership of the community's energy sovereignty and energy independence, but also to provide economic development for the community. There is a great graphic that I don't have attached here that just kind of shows a water barrel and represents the energy funds that go into the community. And economic development on most areas of Indian country is a challenge, and it's definitely true in Huslia and remote areas of Alaska as well. Most of the money that comes in and goes towards paying energy costs, it comes into Huslia and then it immediately leaves when the community purchases imported diesel fuel. And that doesn't hang around the community very much. It really comes in and then sometimes doesn't even enter the community, just gets bounced around to the heating vendors. So it's going into the pockets of the major oil producers or the oil shipping companies. And as we look at how to improve the economic viability of Huslia, looking at how we can utilize those energy dollars locally is a big priority. So the project is projected to create about 5 to 12 part-time jobs for wood cutting. And one of the goals there is really to look at resources that fit in well with the traditional way of life. And so probably is the case in many of your communities. A typical 8 to 5 job does not generally fit in well with the lifestyle in Huslia, living a subsistence lifestyle. There are seasons for different things, and in winter typically folks go out and they're harvesting biomass or wood resource from the community to feed their personal homes. And so it's an easy lift to try to create a system that will utilize locally sourced biomass to heat the major community buildings, which we're all designed to utilize oil-fired heat as opposed to biomass. So that's one of the main goals of the community, is to try to figure out how can we spread those energy dollars around the community rather than just having them barely touch the community and then leave almost immediately. And folks in Huslia are very good at going out and harvesting wood to heat their homes. And so the supply chain of moving from that to utilizing wood to heat their public buildings is a fairly easy lift. Next slide. So this map shows the community of Huslia right there where it says number 2 in the middle. There's now on the northwest or northeast corner of that lot, there's the community. This is an older map, apologies. As you might imagine, they don't update Google Maps very frequently with directions in Huslia, Alaska, or new buildings that get built. So on the top right of the Birch Grove subdivision, plat number 2005-2, is where there's now a community biomass building, and there is a buried heat line that goes up towards the main building. Above that, the school, and then over to the right, or the east in this case, which there's a building there that's got a large circle next to it. That's the water plant, and then directly adjacent to that is the clinic. So there is a buried heat line that heats the school, the water plant, and the clinic now from a centralized biomass heating facility. Next slide. This is one of the facilities in the community that's heated. That's the water plant. So Huslia is fortunate in our region. Not every community has piped water sewer. Huslia does, which is hugely beneficial to the quality of life in the community and very instrumental, especially in a time of COVID-19. And the challenge is just keeping the facility heated for an economic cost. When you're bringing in heating oil and you're living in a place that has 14,000 heating degree days a year and trying to keep the water and sewer systems heated, the fuel source becomes an incredibly important topic. Next slide. So that was the water plant. This is now the Huslia School. We were really lucky as part of the project. It kind of aligned with an ongoing renovation of the Huslia School. They're one of the few communities in our region whose population is growing, and their school was at capacity. And so it received a facelift. I think it was probably the first major facelift since it was built in the 1970s, I believe. And that happened 2 years ago, or 2 to 3 years ago. And they combined the elementary school, which was in the yard, and made the gym bigger. And as part of that project, they redid the mechanical system. And so the project that we did on creating a biomass system to fit into the existing heating system of the school, the water plant, and the clinic, it was really aptly timed to fit in with the heating system renovation in the Huslia School, as they tried to incorporate larger heat emitters, and they were able to which allow you to supply lower temperature heat to the building. And then we were able to get the school to add to their mechanical scope and put an area that was easy for us to tie in so that it would be easy for us to supply heat. And it's really cool for the tie-in with the school. It's the first in our region where we've been able to partner with the school, and the tribe has actually established a heat sales agreement with the school. And that really came down to a very vocal community member who's on the school board that was really pushing this project. And I think everybody in the community is really thankful that he did, because we needed the school as the largest energy consumer in the community to really make the project economically viable. Next slide. So as I said, the major participants were the Huslia Tribal Council, which applied for and received the funding and owns the biomass system that was built and constructed. The city of Huslia, which operates the water plant and the I think they own the building where the clinic is on, although those facilities are kind of jointly operated by both the tribe and the city. They share a lot of responsibilities in the community and jointly handle some of the major infrastructure projects in the community. And then the local school district, YKSD, and Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortia, which is the entity that went through and built the clinic and the water treatment plant. They've got an energy arm and were really another key player in putting the project together. They had some funds from an older biomass study that they were able to use to put together the engineering drawings on the project, which was a fairly substantial cost. I believe that was about $40,000 to get the project engineered and move through fire marshal approval. And then my organization, Tanana Chiefs Conference, which works in the behest of our tribes to assist with the development of different energy projects, amongst other other things that TCC does. Next slide. So the overall goal was TCC would step in and assist with project management portion of the project, get the project built, and then hand it over to the Huslia Tribal Council to work to actually operate the system and work with YKSD, the school, and the water plant and clinic to create heat sales agreements. The Tribal Council would purchase the biomass from local vendors and then sell the heat essentially. And the goal of the project was we would offset about $40,000 or $50,000 of heating fuel every year and be able to spend that money on part-time staff members, both cutting wood and then maintaining the system. Next slide. So in year one, the Yukon-Kaikuk School District, that was a negotiation. We were able to, as I said, you really work closely with their mechanical contractors and get them to insert a heat exchanger on the return side of their existing hydronic boiler system loop. That was a big success because that was the first time they had kind of expressed willingness to work with the tribe on a heat sales agreement. And then we went forward with the rest of the design and actually buried the heat lines and began constructing the system. Next slide. The original project goals, I said, were cost reduction, carbon reduction. That's a big priority for our communities. As you all have probably read, rural Alaska specifically gets hit with some of the consequences of a warming climate. And for folks down in the lower 48 who may not be seeing the results firsthand, we're certainly seeing them up here in many communities in the form of moving foundations, vastly changing seasons, and a variety of other factors. And then community resiliency. That's obviously a priority for the community as they look to make sure their community can sustain itself for the long term. That was one of their original interests in the project, is they realized they needed to change how things were going if they wanted to keep their community strong and resilient for the future. And then economic development. This was a big, comparatively for the community, a big opportunity for economic development, taking those energy dollars that would otherwise have left the community and spreading them out more evenly throughout the community. Next slide. So what we did was we installed 3 Garn 2000 biomass boilers, and they're heating 3 buildings in the community: the school, the water treatment plant, and the clinic. Our goal with the project, as always, is to maximize local hire in any of these remote projects that TCC assists with, and we were really proud that that particular goal was achieved. We were able to use a local contractor for the construction of the building, and it's always nice for me to see local guys on the site, and we had at least for the building construction and laying the pipe, 100% local hire. The main general contractor was based out of Galena, which is about 200 miles downstream on the Yukon River in another larger community. Next slide. Oh, and overall, the project costs were about $720,000, and Huslia Village Council was able to come up with 50% per the grant requirements, which was, kind of a testament to the value that they saw in the program or in the project. So this is the biomass system getting constructed. We do monolithic slabs up here a lot so they can handle any shifts with the changing substrate below the ground, and they're typically just an easier pour in the community. Next slide. And we utilized a kit steel building that was that we've been rolling out through a variety of different biomass projects. I want to say this was our 3rd biomass project that we were able to assist our communities with, and just trying to keep things simple and standardized so we're not recreating the wheel in each community is a big priority. Next slide. And along the lines of simplicity, we used this EcoFlex Twin. It's a buried heat pipe that's got 2 runs of insulated 2-inch PEX piping. PEX is incredibly resilient when it comes to freezing and thawing, and that's what distributes the heat from the main biomass system where they load the cordwood out to all of the facilities. And in each facility that we're tied onto, it's the same basic way that we're tied in with the biomass heating system, in that it's on the return loop of the boiler. So if the main oil-fired boiler, does not see sufficient temperatures being hit with the use of the biomass system, the oil-fired boiler is always in place in the community building to take on the load of the building. And that's just kind of to make sure that if so we're not having somebody kind of like in the old movies, you see, you know, the railroad operator just shoveling coal into the furnaces. We don't want to put an undue burden on anybody in the community and make sure that people are getting up at all hours of the evening to manually feed the biomass system. With these cordwood systems, it's always good to have them kind of be considered the backup, even though for our purposes, we're using the oil-fired boiler as the backup. The design principle is really that the biomass portion of the project will be the backup. And that way we're not at risk if somebody doesn't feed the boiler of heating the building, because our number one priority in the community is obviously to make sure that at 40, 50, 60 below, these buildings have sufficient heat. And so in this particular project, it was kind of a unique design with our engineering, in that we were able to, because of the piping configuration, make sure that the oil-fired boilers in the facilities would backfeed in the event that the temperature of the glycol moving into the building got to a certain temperature that was too low. The boilers would not only supply the building, but they'd be able to supply heat back to the biomass building, which was beneficial because the other method of doing that. Thanks, Tommy. The other method of doing that has historically been electric heat, and in the community of Huslia, their normal electric rate is 67 cents per kilowatt hour, and so electric backup resistance heating was not a good option for the community. So we went with a hydronic backup, essentially an oil-fired backup. Next slide. And so this is the inside of the biomass building. This is an older construction photo. The project is very much finished. I would say it's 99% finished. The only challenge that we've got now is kind of a contractual challenge. As we were moving through the project, we had a vendor, a contractor that we had worked with on the mechanical side of things who had done, this would have been his third project with us, and he was very trustworthy and reliable contractor, and he ended up having a stroke part of the way through the project, and we witnessed some aspects of the work kind of fall off. And so there are a few items that still need to be finished. His scope of work is done, but we came across some PEX rings that were not appropriately installed and are having to go back as a consequence and revisit a few portions of the mechanical system, which has kind of kept the project from operating in full force. That plus the COVID restrictions in the community. There are, many folks in the community are kind of on lockdown, as each community deals with COVID challenges differently. Huslia, I know, has been very strict, and they've been able to contain the spread of COVID-19 in the community, but that's created less opportunity for going out and harvesting wood, and it's made getting contractors in to button up the last little bit of the work very complicated over the last few months. What would normally be a few weeks has just snowballed into multiple weeks, and a number of projects that we're assisting with the Tanana Chiefs Conference have been impacted. But the Department of Energy has been incredibly gracious, and we've done a no-cost time extension. We've got a contractor that did make an inspection trip up there, and we're confident that in the next quarter 2 of FY21, we're going to get these PEX rings installed and be able to bring the system, bring it up and make it fully operational. We're a little cautious of bringing it up to and using it to its full potential, because although the system is working and it was commissioned, it's not installed to the product specifications. So we've been a little bit hesitant, as you might imagine, but working through the challenges, as I'm sure many of you are, in the midst of COVID-19, and the community is very excited to move the project forward and start sending a lot of cordwood through the system. And I know the school district is as well. And folks in the community are excited at the prospect of being able to go out, harvest wood, and bring it back to sell to the tribe for use as a locally sourced heating fuel in the community. Next slide, and that is the end of my presentation. So any questions? I know there's a system for that, and as Lizana said at the beginning of the presentation, anything that we can share from our project that will help other projects move forward or go smoothly, we are happy and anxious and willing to share. So please don't hesitate to reach out to either myself or Huslia. Apologies on their behalf that they're not able to call in today, but thank you everyone for listening and for your time.
Great, thank you, David. And you're also going to present on Hughes Project. So it looks like your slides are up, and have that.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lizana. Next slide. So this project has been a little bit of a saga for us. This is a project that I am, this is by far my favorite, kind of one of the most innovative projects I'm involved with, and it is the implementation of a large solar PV, diesel, and battery system in one of our communities, Hughes, Alaska. The community is located just upstream from Huslia. I say just, it's about 200 miles upstream for Huslia, which in our case is just around the corner. And it's a small community, only about 100 folks in the community. And they're very remote. When folks in the lower 48 say remote, it doesn't really present a clear picture of how remote Hughes is. They are 200 plus air miles, very small community. All of their power is generated in a remote diesel plant. And this community, next slide, I would say amongst all the communities that I work with is definitely one of my favorites. They have really strong leadership. Wilmer Beatus, who's unable to be on the phone call today because he's leading a number of projects up there, is both the chief and the mayor. Next slide. And, you know, in different communities, folks have different levels of success accomplishing their community plans and their community visions. And I would say Hughes is very unique in that they are really rock stars at making a plan and then completing the plan and making sure that the work is done well and moving on. And because of that, they're seeing folks, you know, the joke along the Yukon and Kayukuk rivers is that, man, for such a small community, Wilmer sure has a lot going on in Hughes. And it's really because of the solid leadership in the community, not just Wilmer, but also their tribal administrator and their city administrator are all longtime staff members and really dedicated to the community and moving projects forward. Next slide. So in different areas of the country, I know folks are not always certain where their power comes from. In the community of Hughes, it's very clear it comes from this small diesel power plant. And this is everything. This is the building that keeps the runway lights on, that allows planes to land, light flights to land, fuel to be brought in. This is the building that produces the power to allow the clinic lights to stay on. This is the building that produces the power and electricity that allows the water plant to stay pumping water through the community and keeps that heated. This is kind of everything. And as a consequence, if this goes down, power plant goes down, or the fuel cost is disrupted, it creates a challenge with energy sovereignty and security for the community. You can see the graph on the right side showing the average cost per kilowatt hour for electricity in Hughes. It's about 71 cents a kilowatt hour compared to the national average of 11 cents a kilowatt hour. And so our goal with this project was really to figure out, next slide, how can we get from the current model, which is all of the fuel for the community, which supplies that diesel power plant, comes in DC6s that were last built in the 1950s and 1960s. That's not really a secure energy future. So the question that the tribe posed was, how can we get from here, which is relying on imported diesel fuel for 100% of our electricity generation, towards a more sustainable future, towards something that allows the community to utilize locally available resources. And so for folks who didn't think that Alaska had any solar resources, well, surprise, surprise, we do have a very solid solar resource up here for at least part of the year. We're not getting a ton of sun right now in the midst of December with solstice coming up in the next week or so. But for most of the year, and on average, the interior of Alaska gets a little bit more solar activity than the country of Germany, which has the most solar installed per capita of anywhere in the world. I think that's still a true statistic. And the reasons are somewhat similar that we're interested in solar. Germany's kind of made a really big push towards solar electricity because they've got Russia controlling some of their pipes and the spigot that controls their energy supply. Well, in some of our remote communities, we have a similarly tenuous connection with our electricity. And so next slide. It really underpins, you know, the way of life in the community when you're always thinking about how are we going to get the next load of fuel, where is it going to come from, and what happens if those planes go down or if there's a disruption or what have you. Everett's is the fuel company that runs out of Fairbanks, Alaska. They are often filmed in videos because there's not many people running DC6s and DC4s around the country anymore. So if they're doing old-timey videos, usually Everett's gets a call for one of their planes to be in a shot, and that's great for the big screen. That's not so great if your remote electricity relies on these planes staying in the air and continuing to fly. Next slide. So one of the things that Hughes embarked on was some energy planning, and they did that with the help of the Department of Energy back in 2015, I believe it was. Leslie Caboti came up to the community and worked with Hughes on the development of an energy plan. And out of that meeting came a renewable portfolio standard, which I would put forth that any entity, any tribe on the phone right now listening in could easily pass. It was a resolution that basically said the tribe recognizes the variability of energy resources and kind of the tenuous situation that they're in, importing 100% of their fuel, and they are looking to diversify that. So for Hughes, they were trying to offset about 50% of the locally imported diesel and start generating energy from locally available resources. Next slide. And presents some challenges for any community. For Hughes, one of the big challenges is making sure that that energy can be incorporated into the small remote powerhouse. This is one of their diesel generators, a John Deere 4045 with a 100 kW gen head on it. This is one of the workhorses that keeps the lights on in that community. And across the country, you're hearing calls that there are challenges incorporating the high penetrations of renewable energy into existing electric distribution systems and electric generation systems. Well, in Hughes, we have a really specific case study of that. We've got a fairly large solar PV array, fairly simple in many ways switchgear, and a fairly low load, and we've got to make sure all of those different pieces can interact with a battery that was put in and that the lights don't go off. And most importantly, we've got to make sure that the two gentlemen, Sean, who's in the photo right there and is still working, and Gil can operate that diesel powerhouse and have all the know-how that when the system or when their phones are out and they can't get in touch with anybody here in Fairbanks or down in Anchorage, that they have all the local know-how to operate the system and get the community up and running when there's an outage or other issues. So those are some of the challenges. Next slide, that go into the development of this micro hybrid diesel PV battery system. The goals were to increase tribal energy security and resiliency. And then a big thing, and the reason that TCC is involved, is we're not looking for one-off projects. We're really looking for how can we get successes in projects and make sure that they are replicable in other areas of the TCC region. That's my organization, and I should have said this from the get-go. We represent 37 federally recognized tribes, which is about 6% of the total federally recognized tribes in the country, and assist them with infrastructure projects. We run the Indian Health Service program for all of our tribal members, and just in general try to encourage tribal sovereignty and self-sufficiency. And for me, that's developing energy projects that help our tribes reduce their dependence on imported diesel. And then finally, another goal was to implement a financial model that would allow us to work with the existing subsidy for rural electric rates power cost equalization, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that this project, which is designed to reduce reliance on imported diesel, is not increasing anybody's electric rates. As you guys saw from the earlier slide, folks, the school, the post office, the community facilities that go over their allocated amount pay 71 cents a kilowatt hour. Without explaining too much on the system that we've got in place, the first 500 kilowatt hours, every resident has power cost equalization on, which means in Hughes' case, they pay closer to 25 cents a kilowatt hour. But after you go over that 500 kilowatt hours per month, or for any small business or school trying to develop in a community, they're paying the full 71 cents a kilowatt hour, which is a huge challenge. Next slide. So as we move forward on this large solar PV diesel battery project, we realized right off the bat we had a challenge. Hughes was originally designed as a single phase generation and distribution community, and so the generators were generating at single phase and they were distributing at single phase, which was not an issue when the system was designed and built. It's a fairly small community. Again, I think this is a map from roughly 2010, 2007, and they've got there are entire roads and subdivisions that have been built in Hughes that are not shown on this map. So when the electrical system was designed and built, it was a smaller community than what it is today. And as you get larger, most communities rely on three-phase. power. And so most of the equipment and the gear that we needed to use was designed for 3-phase power. And so originally we thought this wouldn't be an issue. As we looked at the inverters that were needed and kind of how we would handle power quality, we realized quickly we needed to upgrade from a 1-phase to a 3-phase system. And so that was kind of hurdle one that we overcame, and we're able to do that in, geez, I think it was 2017, convert the school and the major facilities over to 3-phase and separate out different areas of town onto individual phases. We also had to change out the switch gear, and we were able to combine that with a project that was ongoing at the powerhouse at the time and get them to run some additional conductors and rewire things as 3-phase. So that was actually fairly straightforward. It was a complicated process, but we made it. Next slide. The next part of the project, we had some funding from another source. I should say Hughes had some funding from another source to do a community-wide LED lighting upgrade. The biggest thing we like to tell our communities is that if you, the cheapest kilowatt hour is the one that you don't use. So if we're trying to produce enough solar PV and store it in batteries to offset a kilowatt hour, it makes a lot more sense to see, hey, is there a way that we can stop from ever using that kilowatt hour? So we did a community-wide LED lighting upgrade. Every light bulb in the community was swapped out from fluorescent over to LED, and it knocked the power consumption of the power plant down, which helps us size a solar PV battery system, but also can make it a little bit more challenging for economies of scale when you're operating a small standalone electric utility. Next slide. So then we picked a site for the solar array. They're really good at brush cutting and cutting down trees in Hughes. Next slide. And so this should say site of solar array in I believe this would have been winter 2017. Next slide. And then in 2018, we were able to build up 120 kilowatt solar PV array. The gentleman on the bottom right is Edwin Byfeld. He is with Alaska Native Renewable Industries, absolutely great guy. And I would say one of the key components of this project, he's from the village just downriver, Huslia, and he's just started a company in 2018, and he's got cousins and relatives in the community of Hughes. So we brought him up. He kind of took it on himself to go down to Solar Energy International, I think based in Colorado, in fact, and got trained up on solar PV. And then we kind of set him loose on the project, gave him some guidance, and a few weeks later, we had 120 kW solar PV array that was set up with 100% local labor, which was a huge win. Next slide. As we were moving through the project, we, as I said, had a number of challenges and setbacks. And in the midst of all of this, we were working with a vendor in the state who was keeping us appraised of the prices for batteries, which have changed substantially over the last few years. And essentially, he said in 2019, look, guys, if you can wait a year, we can get you about double the capacity of the battery for about the same amount of cost. And so it slowed our project down a little bit, because at the end of the day, this is a 10, 20-year project for the community, and another season to get double the capacity with our limited resources seemed like a good time to wait. So in 2019, we had Edwin Byfeld's company come back up, do all of the wiring, and this was kind of a little bit of an unknown. Remember, we're operating 200 plus air miles away from Fairbanks and doing a project that at the time was the largest solar PV array in the state. So we had some numbers for what it should cost to do this, but as you guys probably all know from construction projects, so much of the final cost for construction really depends on the contractor and the crew that you've got. And these guys did an absolutely fantastic job on putting the system together and getting it wired. We had a local electrician who was also from that village downriver of Huslia, and as an electrical administrator, had just gotten done with a stint on the slope. And so we got some really high quality wiring work done for the project. Next slide. And he was actually able to come in. That's him in the corner right there, masked up this year as he was installing the battery. His name's David Atla. And this is the battery building that we ended up having to put in place this last year. We were also at the same time kind of got roped into an 80,000 gallon bulk fuel project that we were assisting with in the community, and we're able to use the same contractors because we were kind of limited on funds. We were trying to create economies of scale, and so some things changed, as they will, with our the vendor we were working with. And originally our plan per the vendor was to put this ABB emesh battery system outside. As we kind of developed the project further, it became very apparent that the vendor ABB was not really comfortable with that idea, and so we had to come up with the cost for a new building, which is the Quonset hut that you'll see on the slide there, and that was not cheap. You can tell that I'm not photographing to take pictures. I'm just photographing to make sure that my contractors checked off all the right pieces on their scope, because it's not the, I was looking through my photos and I don't have any fantastic backup photos of what the whole thing looks like put together, but I've got plenty of specific photos about things that I had to talk to somebody about. And then on the right side, you can see the building on the left. The middle is the ABB battery unit, and then on the right is a transformer that was put into that battery building to convert the power. The battery itself is a 250 kW output, so that's its max output. And then there's 335 kilowatt hours worth of storage in there. Hughes has a load of about 50 to 70, a base load of 50 to 70 kW. And so this battery should be able to run the community for about 5 hours when it's fully charged, depending on their loads in the summer. And the goal is really to run the community. Next slide.
Pardon the interruption. You have 5 minutes left.
Thank you, sir. The goal really is to be able to turn the community off for parts of the spring and summer. So logistics, just to give you guys an idea of what logistics looked like, our racking came from Ridgefield Corners, Ohio, and this is just the logistics that I can show you that are on a map. What we actually did was ship stuff from Ridgefield Corners over to Seattle, put it on a barge up to Anchorage, trucked it up to Nenana, and then from Nenana it went on a 800-mile roughly barge trip up down the Tanana, down the Yukon, and then up the Kaikuk rivers to the community of Hughes. We were able to put it into place. Next slide. So the cost of shipping was a pretty large cost. And again, I had never, kind of developing this project was new for me at the time. And so it's doing something the first time is always a challenge. And we learned a heck of a lot on the project and moving forward, but it added quite a bit to the cost, bringing stuff from that far of a distance and that many modes of transportation. Your cost per watt for installed solar really becomes dependent on the cost per pound for the freight that you're bringing in. Next slide. So back to the microgrid control package that we're working with Intelligent Energy Systems on. This is a rough layout, which probably doesn't mean a ton to folks that are looking at it, but this is how the system kind of interacts with the utility in Hughes. The solar PV panels put out electricity, and we actually got those PV panels and the inverter energized this last November, I believe it was, or maybe end of October. I can't remember the exact date, but they energized the inverter, turned the power on. And unfortunately, due to COVID-19 delays and some of the challenges we had with the budget, we ended up not being able to, the project got pushed back just a little bit. And we decided it was not in the best interest to put the batteries in this year. So next slide. This emesh unit that's on the screen, which is an ABB product, is kind of the case for the batteries. And you can see the little trays that the batteries slide into. So right now that ABB unit is in place in the Quonset hut up in Hughes. It itself is too large to kind of ship in on a plane. So you really have to barge that unit in and then position it so you're setting up the Quonset hut around it. But the batteries themselves are safe down in Anchorage. We made the call as we got later on in the year to not try to rush things, especially with COVID, and keep the batteries charged and down in Anchorage in a warehouse. And we're going to get them up as soon as the sun starts shining in March, fly them up and install them and fully commission the system. Next slide. And the NREL modeling basically shows, this is a rough layout of a daily load profile in the community of Hughes for June. The blue is what we're planning on getting from the batteries, from the solar PV. And then the blue and yellow is what we're planning on getting from the solar PV and batteries. And we're hoping that this will be a conservative estimate, and actually for large parts of the summer and spring, we'll be able to run diesels off in the community. And personally, that'll be a huge success for me, for Tanana Chiefs Conference, more importantly for the community of Hughes, if we can get them to that point, because it's kind of the goal of just about everybody working with remote rural electric projects or rural renewable projects. Next slide. You really have to, extend a ton of appreciation to Lizana and the Department of Energy. They have been incredibly flexible throughout this project in helping us figure out how to make this project move forward. We decided long ago we were going to get it done through hook or crook, and that has meant going over budget in a number of ways. And the Department of Energy was able to come up with some additional funds for the project, and we are just incredibly grateful. And then my organization, Tanana Chiefs Conference and Hughes, increased their chunk of the project pretty substantially too, by about $400,000. But this is a project that a lot of folks in the interior are looking at, and we are just very excited about being able to turn on and fully commission. Next slide. And you can see the DOE funding, you know, is just incredibly important to making these projects economically viable. Something that we really don't want to do for our communities is put in a project that's going to increase cost. And with such a small population and such high costs, it's hard to do that without grant funds. And then next slide. So yeah, we'll be commissioning in the spring, and looking forward to running Hughes with no diesel generators on, hopefully in the next 4 months. Next slide, and that's it. Thank you guys so much for your time, and you know, as always, any questions, please feel free to reach out. We are happy to help folks follow behind us, or save any frustration or heartache that we can as other people develop their own projects. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, next we're going to have Forrest Bunton tell us about the Alaska Village Electric Cooperative's Stebbins and St. Michael's Wind Project, and hopefully some history on some of the other stuff. It's all yours, Forrest.
Okay, give me a second here. I just lost the feed from you guys.
Oh no.
Okay. Oh, I got it back. I hit the wrong button.
Okay.
So
you're on.
Okay, this is Forrest Bunton. Appreciate the time to do this presentation. I'm the department manager for project development and key accounts here at AVEC, and we've got 4 people in our department, and our whole focus is really on renewable energy and energy projects for our villages. Next slide. So we got together with the communities of Stebbins and St. Michael's and formed a joint venture so that we could be a tribal entity and move forward with this project. Next slide. So a little bit about Alaska Village Electric Cooperative. For those of you that aren't familiar with cooperatives, they're member-owned utilities. We represent 58 villages throughout the state of Alaska. And you know, you can see there what our statistics are, but a couple of things that I wanted to point out is that we're 94% Alaska Native throughout our entire membership of 30,000 people. Next slide, please. So this gives you kind of an idea of how spread out we are from up there at our most northern village of Kivalina down towards the bottom in southeast Alaska to Yakutat. It's approximately 1,400 air miles. All of our villages are, except for Minto right there in the middle, that's the only village that you can get to by highway transportation. All of the other villages are boat and air only. Next slide. So this kind of gives you an idea of where we are throughout the state of Alaska. I wasn't able to put Yakutat in there because I forgot about it. But it gives you an idea of how really spread out we are. Next slide, please. So this slide gives you a breakdown of how our electrical charges are over, you know, what the components are of that. And if you look at the magenta right in the middle, that's all fuel cost. So our fuel cost is a significant amount of our electrical charge each month, and we do everything we can to try to minimize our fuel costs by increasing efficiencies of our power plants with new, more efficient generators, and by putting in wind and a little bit of solar throughout the state. I think we have solar in 2 villages now, but our main focus has been offsetting fuel through our wind program. Next slide, please. So we are now at 32 wind turbines with 4,1800 of installed kilowatt hours. The turbine that you're looking at there is one that we put in 2 years ago in St. Mary's with the help of DOE. That's a 900 kilowatt turbine. And we just finished up the intertie between St. Mary's and Mountain Village, 2 villages that are connected with about a 23, 24 mile road between them. And now that that's in, it is supplying up to 75–80% of the power between those two villages when it's running at full capacity. So one of the things that we're pretty proud of is the amount of fuel that we've displaced over the years. Last year, in 2019, 373 gallons total. Since inception, we started our program in 2006. We've offset 3.9 million gallons. I meant to figure out what that was with regard to CO2 emissions, but I know it's, in the hundreds of tons that have been offset over the years. Next slide, please. So our joint venture between AVEC and Stebbins St. Michael's, these are all the project participants. Highly, what's the word I'm looking for? Just great group of people that we're working with. The Department of Energy has been extremely patient with this. This particular project has run into a lot of delays and a lot of complications, and DOE has worked with us every step of the way to keep it moving forward. Both the villages of St. Michael and Stebbins are part of the Norton Sound Economic Development Corporation. And several years ago, each village was given $1 million to put towards energy projects. And between the two villages, they are participating to the tune of $1.38 million to make this project go forward. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give you an idea of how remote Stebbins and St. Michael are. They're actually on an island out there in Norton Sound, and the island is called St. Michael's. Next slide, please. So we just zoom in a little bit closer to really give you an idea of how isolated these two villages are. Next slide, please. So the village of St. Michael was founded in about 1833 by traders of the Russian American Company, and it was set up as a trading post. And excuse me, their fuel cost there is $5.25 per gallon for gas and $5.02 for heating fuel. Dave touched on this a little bit earlier with the rates from 0 to 500 kilowatt being part of the cost equalization program. For those of you that are not familiar with that, that is a subsidy that the state of Alaska provides to rural communities. There's a formula for that I don't want to get into. It's a little bit complicated and would take more time than we have here. But their 0 to 500 rate is 24 cents a kilowatt hour, and over that is 52 cents, a little bit less than Hughes, but still quite expensive. So we want to do everything we can to reduce the cost of those electrical rates. Next slide, please. So this is the community of Stebbins. There's not a lot known about the history of Stebbins and how it was formed. They first showed up in the census in 1950 with 80 people in their village, all Yupik. And that's kind of the first that we know about Stebbins. Right in the middle of the picture there, we're kind of proud of this. Back in 2013, 2014, we were able, with the help of the Denali Commission, put in a new power plant and new fuel storage for the electric utility and for the community of Stebbins. Next slide, please. So our project goals are obviously to offset as much fuel as we can and to bring the cost of electricity down in the village. This net present value of $6.6 million is just makes the project pay for itself. This project fully in is going to be between $5.5 and $6 million, and a lot of help from everybody to get this one off the ground and moving forward. Next slide, please. So this is the overview of Stebbins and shows you our turbine location site up there along the road to between Stebbins and St. Michael. There is an intertie between the two villages, so they both are on the same power plant. which is really what makes putting a turbine in this community very, very attractive to us. I'll show you here in a second, but you can see the end of the airport runway there, and we're just a little over 1.2 miles from the end of the airport. Next slide, please. So this shows the conical surface for the airport, and you can see that the turbine is within the conical surface, which has caused a significant amount of headache for us in trying to get this permitted through FAA. The local DOT needs to request flight pattern change from left-hand approach to right-hand approach in order to put the turbine in. Part of that work that they have to do is to put in a segmented circle out at the airport at Stebbins before any of that can take place. They had that scheduled, that work scheduled for this summer. However, due to COVID, that was delayed, which is delaying our permit from the FAA to put the turbine up. Next slide, please. So this is our schedule moving forward. The entire project has been bumped by a full year, and we've got our fingers crossed that that permit will come in from FAA in the early spring to, or late spring to early summer, and we can move forward on this schedule. And I wish I had more to talk about with regard to Stebbins, but with the project being delayed, I have no fancy pictures to show you or progress on the construction. Lizana had mentioned the other two projects that DOE funded. One was in Bethel. And actually, if you could back up 2 or 3 slides. One more. There you go. So that is the turbine that was put in Bethel. It's the EWT. It'll be the same one that we're putting in Stebbins, and I suspect that the FAA will require us to paint the turbine the same candy stripe that we put in Bethel. Sorry, Lizana, I don't have the figures in front of me for Bethel and St. Mary's to tell you what the fuel offset has been, but I can tell you that they have been operating at between 95 and 98% availability over the last year and a half. And we've met all of our goals with regard to carbon offset and fuel offset with both of those turbines. And I must say that the EWT turbines are performing above and beyond our expectations. And we expect that once we get those fine-tuned and we get some battery backup into both of those villages, that they will exceed our program goals that we set with DOE. And that's all I have. And I'll take questions at the end of this when people are asking Dave's questions as well.
Thank you, Forrest. I also want to remind folks that on the website we have a project database, and if they want to see some of the prior presentations on the other projects for Bethel and others, that those are posted on the website. So thank you all your presenters for your time and your willingness to share your stories and your projects. Next, I'm going to pass the floor to James Jensen. James is a contractor to the office, and besides being a project monitor on some of the projects, he's also been instrumental in bringing you our monthly webinar series for actually many years. So James will be the moderator for the questions, and the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Lizana. We got a good amount of time for questions, so let's please submit ones that you might have. We do have some, so I'll get started with those at this point. The first question, talking about the wood boiler, garden wood boilers. How important is wood quality and uniform moisture content in the wood for operating those boilers?
Yeah, that is a great question. This is Dave. That's it's incredibly important. The garn units require wood that's got less than 20% moisture content, and so there's actually a significant difference if you look at the equivalent gallons of diesel in a cord of wood that's 20% or less versus a cord of wood that's say 25 to 30%. The offset in terms of heating value in number of gallons of diesel is, like, I want to say that if it's a higher moisture content, let's say 30%, it's equivalent to like 55 gallons of diesel in heating value. If it's 20% or lower, that same cord could be equivalent to 125 gallons of diesel. So it's really important to make sure that you've got seasoned wood, that you check the wood with a moisture meter. And you know, the best example somebody told me was it's kind of like, you know, you've got a fire, and if you're putting in wet wood, it's kind of like you're trying to stoke that fire while you're throwing water on it, and you're just creating a bunch of steam. It creates maintenance issues with the stack and creosote buildup in the stack. It creates, you know, issues with just the gases not being, you know, having too much steam and not combusting appropriately, the wood gases that are put off, and overall the system just does not run as efficiently. So wood quality is really, really significant. And there's a number of ways people address that. You can cut wood down and then stack it, you know, and season it under cover, or you can do what's called girdling a tree and basically allow it to dry while it's still upright. You make a strip of, you pull the bark off, essentially a really deep scar around it, and let it just dry standing up. There's a number of different ways that folks have dealt with it, but it's very important.
Great, thank you. Same project, what's the design life on those garn boilers?
It can be anywhere. I want to say that the vendor is actually based out of Minnesota, Dectra Corporation, this guy Martin Lund. I think he started manufacturing in the 80s, maybe early 90s, and some of his first systems are still out and being used. You know, just like anything, the biggest variable is system operations and maintenance is kind of the key word. If you do a good job of replacing fire bricks when they wear out, you know, some folks like to really heave a piece of wood into the firebox on those units, and that's not the best for long-term life of those fire bricks. But yeah, if you keep it swept out and you know, change things as they wear out, keep an eye on your bushings to make sure you don't have any electrical connectivity to the steel unit and no electrolysis that'll rot out the units, then he's still got those units, you know, some of his first units that are still operating, and they've been out there for about 30 years. So it can be quite a long time. It just depends on the O&M.
Great, thanks. A related question on the wind turbines for Forrest. The EWT 900. How do you address the maintenance needs for that turbine? Do you have in-house staff?
So AVEC has 2 full-time wind techs for all of our fleet of turbines, and then we have a maintenance agreement with the manufacturer of EWT, and it gets a routine once-a-year checkup, and then they also monitor that turbine remotely. So if there's any faults or any other kind of issues, they can address most of them remotely. If it's something that has to be addressed in person, they've got a tech. I can't remember if he's here or if he's in the lower 48, but they can usually be up here within 24 to 72 hours, depending on how serious of an issue it is.
Great. Follow-up question for you, Forrest. Can you describe the wind to heat application? Like, I can't. They're referencing Bethel here, but is it in the Bethel project? But I guess how are you using the winds for heat?
Right. So there's no wind to heat in Bethel. I think our average load in Bethel is around 3,200. So there's essentially no excess wind. Whereas in St. Mary's and also there will be in Stebbin, we'll have excess wind. And essentially what we do is we take a boiler, an electric boiler, and we put it in the power plant, and that feeds our existing heat recovery loop. And then anything above and beyond that, we can put electric boilers in specific buildings. Stebbins, specifically, we're going to put a remote electric boiler in the pump house, and hopefully offset about 6,500 gallons of fuel per year that the community of St. Michael uses to heat their water, which they pull out of a lake, I think about 2 miles, a mile and a half, 2 miles from town. So a good opportunity there for us to offset more fuel and save people money in the community.
Great, thanks, Forrest. Detailed question here, Dave, so I hope you got your numbers in front of you. What was the installation cost in dollars per foot for the distribution lines, the heat distribution lines? Do you have an idea?
It's $7.82. No, I'm just kidding.
Right.
I have no idea what the cost per foot for the distribution line was. I know that we had a total budget for that project of $212,000, and we were able to complete both the 3-phase portion on the distribution system, and then also make modifications to the switchgear for that amount. The big challenge is, just making sure you've got somebody in our communities that can do remote line work and is certified and has all their ducks in a row. And we've had a really solid lineman. There's not many linemen that'll go out and work alone anymore for safety reasons. You need to have somebody that can do pole top rescue, and he's actually, since we did the project, gotten tied up on larger projects down in the Anchorage area, so we don't have access to him like we used to before. But I would say that the cost that we paid for the community, and I would say the furthest run that he did is probably 1/4 of a mile or so. And you can go and look at what primary line is on I think it's 7,200 volts. But yeah, the furthest line is probably 1/4 of a mile or so, and we were already split phase, and so he was essentially adding an additional conductor. So if somebody can do the math, or if there's any specific questions, feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to go through some of the numbers. But I would definitely have to dig them up, because we closed that project out,
Sure.
that 3-phase upgrade 2 to 3 years ago.
Sure. And maybe I misspoke, but he was talking specifically about the buried heat line, the distribution heat. Thermal distribution line.
Oh, geez. Yeah, that stuff. I gotcha. Sorry about that. I had Hughes on the brain. That stuff was, if my memory serves me correctly, it was $42 per lineal foot for the Uponor twin PEX heat loop, and we had maybe gotten a little bit cheaper than that, and we actually purchased it right from the factory as opposed to the vendor here in town, because we saved some money. And we had let me see, the Uponor, as it was, is that EcoFlex is produced right down the road from the Garn manufacturing. And so we ended up using a trucking company to get both the Garn units and the spools of Uponor EcoFlex up here. And so I can't remember, I could go through and look, but I believe it was in the range of $37 to $42 a foot. So that stuff was not cheap at all. And that was for the 2-inch. And a little bit cheaper for the 1.5 inch, because we had both products on site. Sorry about that.
No problem. The peak power on the battery in Huslia, it sounded like it was quite a bit larger than the peak load in the village. Was that correct understanding? And if so, why was it so much larger?
Yeah, that is definitely a correct understanding. The peak output on the battery is 200, and it's in Hughes, unless I've goofed up communities again with the question, but it is in Hughes, and the peak output is 250 kW, and then the peak load that they really see is, they're running a 150 kW generator, and that's never had problems black starting a community. So they're at least 100 kW, over what they need to black start the community. And the reason really is because these systems are so small, they're not on any vendor's radar. Nobody is developing a full product line, to my knowledge, that's specific to work in remote Alaska, because it's such a small segment of the market. There's not the economic incentive to do that. So these systems that we're using, these battery systems, the ABB emesh in this case, is designed to be used at commercial facilities down in the lower 48, Walmarts, industrial facilities, and a number of different different facilities that have larger loads. And so basically it's because we use that because it's the smallest that we could get that was kind of economically affordable and available. There are other products out there, but ABB is kind of the tried and true product for the, for Alaska. There's been a number of successful installations using that product, and although we're kind of trying to diversify away from that, it's still a solid, reputable company. And the other benefit of using that particular product is the fire suppression system is integrated into that ABB emesh system. So it's a lithium-ion battery, and I can't remember the specific composition, but it's one that requires it to be, they need fire suppression in the system. Some of the other lithium ferrous phosphates, lithium-ion composition, some of the other ones don't require that fire suppression, but the one that ABB utilizes does, and so we needed to kind of keep it in that container, and that just limited us on the output size.
Thanks, Dave. Another question related to the biomass project, the heat sales. How is the heat quantified? The amount of heat sold quantified, and are there challenges around that?
Yeah, there are, and it was kind of a negotiation. So it's quantified by BTU or million BTU, and it's we utilize the BTU meter. I don't have the specific brand, but if somebody wants to know, they can shoot me an email and I can dig that up for them. But we kind of had to give up some of the control on that. That was one of the carrots and sticks as we were negotiating with the school. They wanted the BTU meter. We were originally going to put it in the biomass system, which was a building, that's located a few hundred feet away from the school. And they said, no, we actually want it at the school, which means that they're not paying for any of the heat lost in transit, which is something, it's going to add up. And so we were okay with that. And then they also wanted it located there so they could hook it onto their DDC system and be able to view it remotely. And so that was, it's a BTU meter that's hooked onto the control system in the school building, and that's how it's quantified in million BTUs. That's how it's sold.
Great. One last question here, and I guess I don't fully understand it, but I'm hopeful that maybe I'm just in the dark on a portion of it. It says tribal government pays electricity bills for tribal enterprises. How is that transaction made possible? I don't know if you guys know what that is.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what that means. I would say that the tribal governments, account for all of their facilities separate. And, so in both cases, there's just, like anything else, things are metered, whether it's heat or electric sales. And then the tribe just has it, just like you would do bookkeeping for any of your other expenses. They have a separate accounting system that they utilize and bookkeep as appropriate or account for things as appropriate.
Thanks. We got one last question that came in, and then I think we'll be done. And that's for Hughes. What software package was used to do the battery analysis in the slide deck that was shown?
Yeah, that was a re-opt model that the NREL, through the DOE Office of Indian Energy Technical Assistance, we were able to get access to, and some folks over at NREL used a re-opt tool to do that. So it's kind of folks who know the history. NREL helped, or an employee of NREL and NREL, I should say, developed Homer, and then now Homer, the modeling software, is kind of spun off, I believe, and don't shoot me if I'm wrong on this, folks at DOE, but and it's kind of held at a private company. And so NREL has another model that they use. I haven't heard much of it since, but it worked really well for us, and it's called re-opt, and it allowed us to kind of optimize the system for different factors, and one of them was our capital budget. And so, the challenge being that the cost of batteries certainly at the time was a moving target, and as was the cost of installed solar PV for this remote location. It's pretty easy to figure out what your cost per watt is going to be installed in an urban community, but a different ballgame when you're shipping all that stuff 800 miles on a river and bringing contractors from out of town, etc. So it allowed us to kind of plug some numbers in there for the cost per watt and optimize the system and figure out kind of what made the most economic sense and had the best payback. And so I would strongly recommend working with the folks over at National Renewable Energy Labs if there are any communities that are interested in that, because it was really invaluable for us and for the project in Hughes to be able to work with them.
Great, thanks, Dave. We did have one more question come in for Forrest. Is there any planning or needed planning for rising water levels around Stebbins and St. Michael?
So that turbine is a good 150 to 200 feet above the town of Stebbins, so we didn't have to worry about any flooding. Stebbins did have a little bit of a storm surge here back in, I think it was 2013, 2014, where a little bit of the town flooded, but other than that, I haven't heard of any issues with flooding in Stebbins.
Great, thanks, Forrest. With that, we have no further questions at this time, so I'll pass it back to Lizanna for closing.
Thank you, James, and thanks again to the presenters. I did want to follow up on Dave's comments. If those folks are interested, again, that service that he mentioned with REOP, it was through the Technical Assistance Program, and you would submit that through the Office of Indian Energy's website, and we'd see where the best sort of technical assistance providers are to address your requests. And with that, that concludes the session for the program review for today. We survived the first day of this interesting virtual review. Yay! So, but if you're going to attend tomorrow, you should use the access link and call a number that you received for session 4, which begins tomorrow at 11:30. So we hope to see you there. And thank you again to everybody. Thanks, Monica, for the tech support and slides, and James for your questions, and again to all the presenters today. Goodbye.